Hello, everyone, and welcome to Hidden Heroes of the IMO. My name is Mark Herndon, Chairman of the M&A Leadership Council, and I'll be serving as your moderator for today's discussion. Now, we've had a lot of fun with the theme and images of this webinar over the last few weeks. But in all seriousness, every acquirer knows that deals can and still do fail at literally any phase along the entire M&A leadership lifecycle model. And a big reason for that, in spite of all of the blood and ink and sweat that's been spilled on how to get integration right, most of those deal failure factors still are occurring at the integration phase. And in our view, frankly, we think that a big part of that is downright misunderstanding and misapplication of perhaps two of the most important roles in the entire M&A universe, specifically the M&A integration leader and the integration program manager. And so today we've assembled an all-star panel of deep subject matter experts that can speak from a true M&A professional standpoint of best practices and how you and your organization can get these mission-critical roles right and increase your overall organizational effectiveness each time you go through the integration process. Now, everyone will be provided a full copy of the panelist bios in the appendix section of the deck, which you'll receive right after the webinar, or as a part of the replay link. So for today, I just want to give a few brief bullet point outlines of the qualifications that each panelist brings to speak to these important topics today. Starting with John Chrisman, who serves as Vice President of Corporate Development, M&A Integration with Cognizant, a leading global technology and services firm. Over the last 30 years, John has done a variety of executive roles for both Cognizant and Dell Inc., and has led over 50 deals in the technology sector, including due diligence, integration strategy, pre- and post-acquisition integration planning, and cross-functional integration with companies in the software, enterprise hardware, and services sector, while at the same time spearheading the continued development and refinement of internal M&A capabilities and processes. John is a former U.S. Army telecom officer supporting the infantry in Panama. Thank you for your service, John. He has an MBA in finance as well as bachelor's degrees in systems engineering and management from Wharton. Now, John also, as you see denoted shortly on the bio in the back of the deck, he also serves as a director with the Board of M&A Standards, the organization that is responsible for developing and administrating the certified M&A specialist designation. So John, welcome to you.
Thanks, Mark.
You bet. Denise Elias serves as senior partner with M&A Partners, where she brings over 25 years of leadership, business transformation, M&A, and consulting experience for a variety of companies ranging from startups to Fortune 500 companies. Previously, Denise served as vice president of the worldwide M&A integration team at CA Technologies, where she and her team simultaneously completed 6 internationally diverse acquisitions ranging from small startups to large global software businesses, while at the same time developing her firm's internal M&A capability development, including a comprehensive integration lifecycle framework, cross-functional integration and engagement model, an updated playbook, and a new program management model. Denise, welcome to you. Good to have you.
Thank you, Mark. Nice to be here.
Wonderful. Turning now to Dan Redmond, who serves as Senior Project Manager M&A with Worthington Industries, a highly sophisticated and diversified global metals manufacturer and processor. While at Worthington Industries, Dan has executed operational transformation programs across the major steel processing division and managed dozens of IT projects ranging from M&A infrastructure and ERP deployments to corporate website development, implementation, and new software platforms. Now, in his current role as M&A Integration Program Manager, he has responsibility for acquisitions, divestitures, and joint ventures, as well as building and refining his IMO capability and playbook process. While in this role, Dan led the program management for their largest acquisition in company history, a multi-site, multinational acquisition, which led him to advocate for a full-time IMO structure at Worthington, which became reality in January 2019. Dan's a former officer in the U.S. Army and served multiple deployments in Iraq, so thank you, Dan, to you for your service as well. He has an MBA from Fisher College of Business at The Ohio State University, as well as a Bachelor of Science at the United States Military Academy at West Point. Now, Dan, if that wasn't enough, you also proudly earned the designation of Certified M&A Specialist in March of 2020. So For all you've accomplished and all your service, thank you and welcome to the panel.
Thanks.
Let me also introduce friend and colleague Linda McMurrin, Senior Partner of M&A Partners, deep subject matter expert in all things M&A. Linda serves over the last 25 years as a deep leader in industries with telecom, professional services, software, and financial services experience. She previously led as Vice President of North American Integration for global telecom provider Ericsson, where she completed dozens of deals, all phases to include due diligence, pre and post acquisition integration planning, multi-country integration, all totaling well over $10 billion in enterprise value. In addition, she has a deep IT consulting background, owning her own company, supporting T-Mobile, Sprint, Nextel, IBM, HP, among others. So, Linda, welcome to you. Thank you for your service on the panel. And I think everybody can see the deep expertise, subject matter, and true M&A professionalism that we've assembled to speak to these roles. So panel, let's get to the business at hand. Let's talk about how do we get more effective in our roles. And let's start with a really tough question, which is how do you document the business case? How do you validate the value add of the IMO leader, program manager, and the IMO team in your organizations? And John, for you, I'm gonna put you first up on this one, if you don't mind kicking that topic off.
Sure, Mark. So I think I would leave everyone with kind of three main points, but before I go into them, I'd give you two examples. I've had the opportunity to kind of build and lead a couple of serial acquirers, so building the IMO capability in teams. But there were two very different approaches, or I would say ways to implement it. One, a senior leadership team that understood the value already because they had experience in prior companies of being a serial acquirer, so they kind of knew what it took. Another, not so much. So on one hand, it was more of a quick business case up front. Here's what we need, and not just for the IMO. If I think about IMO, I also consider what we call the M&A ecosystem, but there are also, within serial acquirers, we can dedicate resources from a variety of different corporate functions like finance or HR or IT. And so we built the business case that said, well, what do you need if you want to do 8 to 10 deals a year? What kind of infrastructure do you need in order to make all of those deals successful, right? And have a sustainable, repeatable process. On the other hand, that same business case was like more of a, hey, we've already done some of these before. We don't have a lot of experience with that serial acquirer kind of mentality. So, let's, show what you can do, prove the value, and then we'll start incrementally adding to the pool, which is kind of what we did. But so 3 points for how do I sell this to my leadership team? One is, think of the IMO as part of the investment required to achieve the ROI of the business case, or if you're going to do, many deals, then, the overall portfolio or the M&A strategy, right? As part of all business cases, there's always things like one-time integration costs. There are things like retention for key employees. This is just another, investment that you got to consider if you want to make the acquisition successful, right? And so if you break that down into, well, what does that mean? How do I show the return? It's really that the IMO is a key enabler to helping you achieve, better synergy capture, whether that be revenue synergies on the top line for growing the companies, or cost synergies on the bottom line, or both, right? In order to enable those cost synergies, it basically, if you've got a better process, a standard and repeatable process with good organization change management comms for employees, and you get better alignment up front, you can typically integrate faster, more quickly. So that'll either enable you to take out costs or non-value added work more quickly, or it can enable you to allow the acquired company and your company to work together more quickly, and therefore start to cross-sell and realize the value more quickly. And finally, a third one would be risks. So to the extent you've got a standard a playbook, a standard team that goes from deal to deal and has deal experience, you kind of already can anticipate some of the common risks or pitfalls and navigate around them. So a lot of this is also about risk, risk remediation or risk mitigation, right? Because you're not going to miss as many things if you've kind of seen the play, learned from experience, and are now applying those learnings, right? And so finally, while a lot of these things, sound good and sound like, yeah, that kind of makes sense, how do you quantify it? Well, it's not easy, it's not perfect, but what you can say is, hey, well, if you can just do the modeling, right? So if I were to achieve, instead of achieving 85% of the business case, I achieve 100%, or I do it more quickly from a revenue synergy perspective, I can model that out, right? Same thing is if I say I'm going to achieve a certain set of cost synergies starting at X period of time, if I can do that 6 months sooner, then I can take that time value of money and say, hey, it's worth something. And so that it can at least give you something tangible if you have to convince the CFO. But so if I leave those three things with you, hopefully that can help you as you think through how do I sell the value of this within my company.
John, thank you. Excellent framework. And Dan, you've had recent and successful experience with this. Take over from there.
Yeah, no, John definitely hit all the key points, especially there at the end about trying to put a dollar figure on it. Our experience was much more, is very anecdotal, and we focused on kind of a couple different areas. One being, value erosion happens quickly after a deal is announced, and so one of the best ways to shorten that time period is by having a better plan, and having somebody dedicated to managing that plan from deal to deal to deal can really help prevent that value erosion. And you do that by kind of point two, building off of lessons learned from previous acquisitions. If you have constantly different groups deal to deal, you don't get that continuity of, hey, I've seen this before, I know what to do here. And then finally, where the rubber meets the road on an acquisition is really the functional area resources that are meeting with their counterparts and understanding how to transition. And by having a stabilizing presence from an IMO, it gives you a little bit more flexibility to stretch people on those assignments at the functional level. Even if they're not as experienced in the process, you have that stabilizing presence that can help guide them through how to effectively manage that transition.
Really, really helpful. And I just want to underscore what you both said and emphasize to all of our participants today on the webinar that you've got a Q&A dialog box in your dashboard to the right of your screen. So please put in questions as the comments trigger thoughts, ideas, and things for further discussion. And we will come back at the end and deal with as many of these as possible. With that in mind, let's go on to the next slide. And Denise, I'm going to ask for some information on the role and focus. And you built a team. You went also from ground zero in a very active and deeply experienced acquirer to establish a professional IMO. And yet there's still in every organization, no matter experience, a lot of questions about what is the role, what is the focus, what do they actually do? Why don't you take over with regard to your essential viewpoint on the key roles and responsibilities that you see indicated here on the screen?
Sure, Mark, I'd love to take a crack at that. What I will tell you, and sometimes it's easier to get away from the professional nomenclature, which all include almost the word integration, and think about these roles in three different ways. At least the way I think about them is the integration executive, I think of as primarily a relationship role. The integration management lead, I kind of think about that as the law and order role. And then the program manager in my thinking is like the traffic cop or the glue that holds your program together. So in the relationship role, the integration executive is really a conduit between the buyer's executive team and the acquired company, and then the IMO. So they are managing relationships, information, and strategy between both the buyer and the seller company, and then passing that information, working closely with the integration management lead to make sure that everyone's ducks are in a row. They really advocate, in my opinion, if they don't, they should really advocate to bring the acquired company into the broader organization with the least amount of business disruption and trying to maintain the continuity in the business, especially for the acquired company, because we know that sometimes being acquired and being integrated can become overwhelming for companies. They frame the program expectations at the highest level, especially with the buying company's executives. I think they're also tasked with taking the complexity of a program and breaking complex problems down into discernible actions or options for the executive team to consider in order to make strategic decisions, and then driving those strategic decisions through the integration.
Yeah, very helpful overview. Now, let me quickly go to Linda, build on what Denise has laid out in terms of the key roles and responsibilities and any highlights or distinctions that you would suggest.
Yeah, so for the IMO program manager during integration planning, you want to make sure that you have milestones in your plans to hit those value drivers that Denise mentioned to support the synergy targets. You want to have leading indicators. And also during planning, it's important to make sure all those cross-functional dependencies are identified so there's no gaps in your plan. And during execution, I think everybody would agree the number one responsibility or role of the IMO PM is to manage and status on that integration plan overall. So secondarily, you want to be on top of risk, actions, issues, and decisions. We talk a lot about decisions in M&A partners. So it's your job to escalate those decisions to the IMO lead. And at the end of the day, it's really all three of you working very tightly together as one team. So from an IMO program manager, you're supporting upward, and then they're supporting you as well.
Great. We've got a minute left. I might bounce this over to you, John. And you've served in all these roles. You've led and managed. You've staffed up in all these roles globally and regionally. What else would you put on our radar screens with regard to roles and responsibilities?
The other distinction I would make, and this is often in larger organizations or ones that, you know, again, a lot of my experience has been in serial acquirers, but you can even add another, you know, resource to this. We call it the business unit integration leader, or some companies call it integration executive. Which lives in the business. It might be somebody that comes from the business and is more like a general manager that would be kind of two in the box with the CEO and running the company going forward. And so it's slightly different from an IMO, which oftentimes is housed with either within a corporate development team or in a finance or an IT or a global PMO type team. And might have more domain knowledge, might be focused more on the business and let the kind of IMO team run the basics of how do you run an integration, right?
Yeah, great add there. Thank you for that. Let's go one level deeper in this discussion and talk about the skills and experiences that will make that role really work, both the integration lead and program manager. And for that, John, I'm going to bring it right back to you to build on that.
Okay. Sure. Well, and I guess elaborating on that, I would say that slightly different skills from that if you have a separate business unit lead versus the corporate development or an IMO lead, but a lot of them are kind of the same, and especially what we're trying to encourage when we hire a new integration leader is somebody that can actually basically step in and do both roles. And a lot of times we're onboarding a business unit leader that might have never done a deal before, right? So we've got to kind of coach them along in the process. And so I'd say first, credibility and trust with the senior leaders in the company. You need that credibility and the trust in order to be able to, you know, the second one, be able to make decisions. People have got to trust that they can delegate and that you're going to make the right decisions with the information on the ground because you're the one that's closest to the action, right? Second one is probably the ability to communicate. You probably hear this oftentimes, but communicate is like some of the biggest things, and or one of the biggest, you know, success factors. A lot of that is also 360. It's up, down, and across on things like the integration strategy. So everybody is aligned on what it is you're trying to accomplish. What are those value drivers? I heard somebody mentioned that earlier today. And then down to the employee level of the acquired company, what's in it for me, right? So you've got to be able to communicate in a lot of different areas what's going on with a cohesive story. The other thing is being able to remove roadblocks or to be a problem solver, because there are going to be problems. There are always to be roadblocks, no matter what deal you're doing, how complex it is. And so that is a key success factor or skill set that I think you need to have in order to be successful.
Great way to start. Yeah. Sorry, one more and then we'll go on.
Yeah, so cross-functional collaboration and ability to, marshal a lot of different types of resources with different perspectives. And then finally, that general manager mentality. So like I said, especially on the business unit side, you've got to be able to step in, work hand in hand with the CEO of the acquired company, the C-suite, step in if that person's going to leave. If there's no succession plan, you got to be able to take over the business. And in many cases have kind of domain knowledge in order to help drive the business case, drive the commercial growth strategy of the combined entity.
John, that's a fantastic list and discussion. Thank you for that. Dan, you're shaking your head. What do you want to add to that? What else would you be looking at?
Yeah, he nailed it. From a program manager perspective, I think one of the big things there is just understanding that's not an administrative role. I mean, there's certainly pieces of it that require some administrative capabilities, managing the risks and issues and having that understanding. But being able to being a person that is respected and valued by the organization, so that you can push into those strategic discussions when you're developing your planning and you're seeing the direction different functional areas are trying to go, understanding the direction, the value drivers behind the integration. And that's come up a couple times now, but it's critical. And being able to help guide those functional areas the right direction to realize the benefits that you're trying to capture is critical. And the ability to manage up is another big piece. The ability to highlight to the executive team, the steering committee, what's going on, where you need help, how you need them to plug in. It's a really critical piece as well.
What you and both John mentioned really resonate with me. It's got to be that general manager mindset. It's really about strategy execution. It is clearly not an administrative role. That's why these roles are so critically important. So, Linda, we have a minute or two. Add on to that from your viewpoint. What else do you define as a critical skill or criteria for role success?
Yeah, so kind of summarizing what John was saying about him being a GM, having a respected leader within the organization. I also look at it as you really need to understand the political landscape of your organization and how best to navigate it. You need to know who the decision makers are and how those decisions are made. Are they made in a big room discussion, or are they kind of made on a one-on-one conversation prior to that big meeting? So I think that's really key to being successful, especially at that IMO lead and executive lead level.
Well put, and you got to manage the white space, and that often is the art in what we do. It's not just the mechanics, but it's the real skill, savvy, and organizational insight. So thank you for bringing that to light. Denise, let's move on, and let's talk a little bit more about what we sometimes refer to as the IMO interdependencies. Now, let me clarify this for everybody on the webinar today. We're not talking about the typical cross-functional dependencies that we need to so carefully map, plan, and execute across the organization. But, the IMO team, those roles specifically within the IMO are a very important unit that have to be effective together. So, Denise, talk to us about what it takes for the IMO lead and the IMO program manager to be successful together, and bring in what other role you might be looking for to be provided out of the IMO.
Yeah, I think Linda mentioned it earlier when we were talking about roles in general. I mean, I really do believe that probably the most important thing between the IMO lead and the program manager is communication and coordination. And unless you're effectively communicating, realistically, a program can go off track quite easily. I think you can do that through really tight governance structure, meeting cadence that becomes very fixed and determinable, and moving decisions through the program are obviously very important as well. So getting to the point where you're comfortable, you're communicating, you're coordinated, those things to me seem to be the most important. In terms of hidden heroes or other things that I would want to have in my IMO, certainly someone who can effectively manage communication, and to the extent possible and within budget, perhaps somebody to also manage change. Because as you know, Mark, the most important thing in any integration probably is communication.
Fantastic. Great build on that, Denise. Thank you. And Linda, let's go to you. Keep expanding. How do you work together? And you've got deep subject matter expertise as a program manager working up and horizontally across the organization. Tell us the secret of those interdependencies between the IMO roles and responsibilities.
So I think it's about knowing what to escalate and when. Sometimes you don't wait till it becomes an issue, right? There's items that you want to push to the IMO lead as awareness, right? Heads up. In one of our projects, we implemented what we called hot topics, and it was just an email. If you had something hot going around for the day, you put hot topic in the subject line, but that made everybody aware, so then they could plan accordingly. I think you also have to work with your team and adapt that governance and rigor that we talk about and that disciplined approach. So I think having a team that's flexible and adaptable and recognizes that need is also important. As far as some of the other roles, depending on the complexity of your integration, you may have an employee engagement track. A lot of people think, the employee engagement is focused just on the HR function, but that's really not true. You could also have the same for, say, customer engagement. What are all the different touch points of the customer, all the functions and where they're touched throughout the integration, and look at that holistically and manage that experience.
Love that viewpoint of bringing the CX and EX involved in that, the employee experience and customer experience, mission critical to what we're all doing. So thank you for that. Dan, take us over from there. What do you think about this?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really important. Honestly, the best relationship builders I've seen between the IMO and the integration leader generally comes, at the end of a 15-hour day on day one, where you're just sitting down, catching up, trying to figure out, so what went well today, what didn't, and having that constant, honest dialogue just between each other is as important as talking to anyone else, so that you can rapidly course correct where necessary and build off the things you're learning. So that's a big one, is just that honest dialogue and time together away from the workspace, where it's possible. You're living in a hotel for, a month after a deal's announced anyway, you might as well spend that extra time together to build that relationship. In terms of other hidden heroes, I think Linda and Denise hit it. Change is critical, and culture as well. HR is really busy with the onboarding and the benefits and all that stuff. Having somebody that can really dig into that facility or organization's culture and map it to yours is valuable.
Fantastic. And what you say resonates with me 100%, and it calls to mind what our friend and colleague John Bender is often fond of reminding his team members and colleagues, that the IMO literally has to be the conscience of the integration. You have to do those deep, insightful, transparent conversation. How is it going, as you say, and bring those things to the forefront. So it's a perfect case in point. In interest of time, let's go on to the next subject. And this is one that is very important for all organizations, but deliverables. What is it that each of these roles, the integration lead and the integration program manager, really has to roll up their sleeves and determinedly, doggedly pursue across the finish line? What do you think about that? And for this, I'm going to point first to John Chrisman again.
Thanks, Mark. I guess we may be remiss. I think the first time we hit this, we focused mostly on the integration leader, so we'll try to make sure we hit the program manager as well this time. But and there's obviously overlap between the two roles. You were just talking about how they work together, right? But first off, I'd say an integration strategy. Second, business case, KPIs, financial reporting capability, in order to be able to measure, are you succeeding, are you keeping on task with the value drivers. Getting the right team in place, both at the steering committee level as well as at the working team level, all across the functions that you need in order to enable success of the deal.
Right.
having the budget, resources, and investments committed and then actually delivered in order to both facilitate the integration as well as the growth plans. And I want to stress growth plans because sometimes I've seen where we've factored in the kind of integration plans, the one-time integration plans, and if you're not careful, you don't think about or invest in the P&L for resources like, hey, if we're going to rapidly scale the growth of this company, it requires hiring a lot of people. Do you have investment for contract recruiters, and or what's the facilities plan and the telecom implications of all that stuff, right?
Yeah.
A lot of times people forget that. You know, and then communications plan, and then finally a well-run steering committee or governance structure, right? So as I think about the integration leader, it's those half a dozen things that are probably the most, most critical.
Fantastic, John. Yeah, I really agree with those. Dan, what about the program manager role?
Yeah, and I'll go base PMP stuff on this one, right? It starts with good risks, issue, decision logs, making sure those things are being captured and escalated appropriately, making sure you have a well-developed and well-mapped integration plan. The integration leaders helping set that vision, and the integration program manager's responsibility is making sure that we have a plan in place to execute it. So that's all key. John mentioned budgeting and synergy capture as well. Keeping track of those things are really important. And then one that we spend a lot of time with, especially on multi-site acquisitions, that's even more important now in a COVID world, and that is understanding who's going where. Understanding we've had a habit in the past of you close on an acquisition and all of a sudden there's 50 people from a different organization sitting in that plant, overwhelming everybody because we're all so excited to get going. What that results in is the maintenance manager isn't doing any maintenance anymore because he's sitting in 15 meetings a day. So we've really been focusing on planning and telling people no, like you don't need to be there yet. Managing that, and like I said, that's important in a COVID world too. If you're making a multi-site acquisition, you may want to think twice about having a crew that's traveling from plant to plant to plant because then you got a contact tracing problem. So just more and more things to consider. But that's a key one for us too, is understanding a travel plan and who's going where and when.
Air traffic control is a sign of maturity as an acquirer. You know the drill, you're well trained to that, and you're respectful of the target co-operations and their people. So well put. Linda, finish us off. We got a minute or two left. What would you add to that list?
It's kind of hard to respond after all that good information. So I was going to add, similar to what Dan said, is that concept of operations, or some people call it the target operating model. So what it looks like day one when those employees come over, that could be your day one target operating model, but then again, you're probably going to have a longer term end state. So that's just important as well when you're doing your project planning for the integration. So that was my contribution. That's what I could add.
All right, fantastic. Well, I'm excited we have some time to tackle this next one because all of these roles that we're talking about today are very difficult. There's, frankly, not enough professional development or educational background in this. There's not as many proven career paths in organizations as there needs to be and as there are developing now. So often it's a very, learn by doing, school of hard knocks. But each of you have built organizations, you've created teams that have done this. You've been careful to select mentors and get great career advice through every step of your career. And that's what we want to focus on a little bit. We'll call it Coach's Corner. And what I'd like to do is just start and kind of go around the horn here and get, a best piece of advice or career counsel that you've either given to one of your team members or that you've received to help you succeed in your career as an integration leader. So Denise, if you don't mind, I'm going to point to you to start this one off for us.
Okay, Mark, thanks. Having built an integration management office from the ground up in the midst of 5 or 6 ongoing integrations, I would say that my main mentors really encouraged me to stay flexible and to trust my gut. I mean, you can and you have to modify your tools, you have to modify your approach, given the deal specifics, the differences in strategy, what you're trying to achieve, and what's working for each integration. So I do think that you need to use your tools, you need to apply them, you need to apply your playbook, but you also have to understand when something is not working and adjust.
Fair enough. Yeah, thank you. Great advice. Linda, how about you?
Yeah, so to Denise's point, no two deals are the same, right? You may have your playbook, you have your templates, you have your traditional governance that you normally use, but for every deal, you need to look at all of that and adapt it for that specific target company, what their culture is, what the pace of that integration is going to be.
Wonderful.
So be flexible, be adaptable. Change is inevitable.
Those are survival skills. Very important. John, how about you?
Well, I think, frankly, it's a lot of the key success factors we've been talking about for the last 30 minutes, right? On top of the, Denise and Linda are talking about basically the art and the science of, the science piece of this is the training that you can get, either what are the tools, the frameworks that you can use to run a structured process, but then the art of, being able to adapt, being flexible and approach, because every deal is different. I'd say, a couple of them are focusing on the key value drivers, right? Yep. What is going to add value to the deal, and those things ought to form some of the nucleus of what that integration strategy is going to be. Another is just, relationship building, as far as, both with I would say the business unit leadership, the acquired company leadership, and with the, corporate, if we're going to be doing this on a recurring basis with a lot of the enabling corporate function leaders in order to ensure that, you can help influence, some of the problem solving that you have to do later on, right?
Yeah.
So, and then from the project manager, I think, Dan hit it earlier about, it's a lot of core, I don't want to say overuse PNP, or, I think you're going to hit in a little bit the CMAS or some of the other training or certifications you can get, but a lot of it is, some structured process and project management, tool sets that are foundational, especially for the integration project manager, but even for the integration leader.
Yeah, good advice. You don't want to have to invent this on your own. Dan, what's some great career advice that you've gotten along the way?
Yeah, I think a lot of it for me comes down to the execution of an integration is where, so there's some good advice around that. And that's the people. It's all going to be your career. It applies to your career as well, right? Your career is going to be as successful as the people around you and the way you interact with those people. And the same thing is true for an integration. Understand that you're in a scenario where people are going through a traumatic event. Like most people have never been acquired. Most people never will be acquired. But when it does happen, that's new. They don't know what to do with that. And so a good IMO and program management team can help with the communication and the planning to make that a less stressful event. And always keep in mind that someone is communicating at all times. Make sure that it's you and make sure that it's your message, because otherwise somebody else's message is what's going to be getting shared.
Right, they're going to MSU, right? Make stuff up during the void. And, ultimately, all accountability comes to the IMO for success of the overall integration. So we can't leave anything to chance or not well managed, coordinated, and aligned to the overall strategy. So panel, I want to thank you. This has been a great conversation. We're going to move to our question and answer portion now. And we've got a ton of great questions that have come in through the Q&A pod in your dashboard. So please be sure and lob in additional questions, participants. We can't wait to get to a number of these. But while our panelists are taking a quick break and looking at some of the questions that have been received online, what I want to do is just tell you a little bit about two upcoming learning opportunities that John alluded to a moment ago. First, the Art of M&A Program Management is going to be run next week, October 27 through 29, online, and the Art of M&A Integration, November 10 through 12, also online. Now, we sometimes get questions, hey, Mark or April at the council, what's the difference between these two? And if I've been to one, do I really need to go to the other one? What's the difference? And here's our honest answer. We think of them as salt and pepper. They're totally different, but you want them both on a great grilled steak. You're going to need both of these program elements to execute effectively on all deals in the future across the organization. And let me tell you what I mean by that. First, I'm going to give you a little bit more about how these two programs are the same. Number one, They're both facilitated by deep subject matter experts, just like you've seen on screen today, with a true voice of experience that you can take back and apply immediately to real jobs, real roles, and real integrations. Both are facilitated in a very highly interactive, experiential approach. Even our programs online are noted for the extensive group discussions and breakout exercises, open dialogues. And each of these 2 workshops will close with a published case study and a capstone discussion that is focused around the course material and helping you apply that to real world scenarios. And the final similarity I want to bring out is the fact that both programs get tremendously high ratings from prior participants, typically 4.5 on a scale of 5 or higher. And they're just great events that you'll want deeply embedded in your organization. As John mentioned, don't make this stuff up at home. Get the best of the best and go apply it and adapt it to your organization and a situation. Now, what's different about the programs? First of all, the Art of M&A Integration was one of our first programs with the M&A Leadership Council, and started, in fact, the Leadership Council 10 years ago. And through continued value engineering and constant innovation and additional content and process and presenter upgrades over time, it's still one of our most popular and highest rated programs. But here's the key. That program is built on a topical structure that provides deep baseline understanding and best practices in a variety of core topic or subject matter areas that you'll need. Things like the panelists have mentioned today: developing the integration strategy framework, developing the concept of integration, and then other core functional and topical areas, such as getting the people and organizational components of integration right. And obviously communications, change management, culture, customer experience, employee experience, and the like, all done with real world experience, war stories, and lessons learned. Okay, so if that's the art of M&A integration, what about the art of M&A program management? The first thing I want to say is it's really somewhat of a misnomer. It's not about the blocking and tackling of how do I become a PMP or what is project or program management all about. Instead, what we do is we take that M&A life cycle from end to end, and we walk through phase to phase through the lens of a program manager and through the lens of an integration lead or IMO, and we'll explore 20 specific different decisions, processes, or critical events that you as an integration lead or program manager absolutely have to hit out of the ballpark every time to be successful. So there's a lot more that I could share with you about that, but here's what I'd like to point out. We're closing out our 2020 programs. There's a discount code on the screen here and in the deck. Just enter that in the registration dialog of the macouncil.org site, and make sure your team members are represented at one or both of those. And if you want more information about which one is right or what's the content, just respond with one word to the email that you'll get from the M&A Leadership Council at the end of this webinar, and just say spices, and we'll know what you mean, and we'll send you a link to a blog article which will outline the content and the differences in the content of each of these workshops. All right, now it's time to jump into some questions, and we've got a ton of great questions. John, I see one that's come in that's spot on fit for you, and Shonda writes, how have you seen IMO roles and organizations structured differently between larger global acquirers versus smaller companies? Great question. Tackle that for us.
Yep. Yeah, and it's probably no surprise that, you know, if you have larger kind of serial acquirers, you know, there's a little bit more infrastructure, there's more G&A structure in place than smaller companies, right? So the big difference is in dedicated resources, especially if you're talking about doing these on a more routine basis. I think I've hit on it a little bit earlier, where, you know, we have maybe a dedicated IMO function and some dedicated M&A corporate functions in HR, finance, or IT. Those are typically the big three, although even within our organization now we've got them throughout several other of the respective functions as well. Versus in a smaller company where, you know, you're not going to necessarily have all that infrastructure in place. It's a lot of additional duties for, you know, the corporate controller or for, you know, one of the HR leaders, and, you know, it might be pulling somebody off the shelf, and Dan can talk to this, right? You know, like somebody who's run, you know, large either ERP programs or program management offices or something like that, that is tasked with, okay, go do this, right? In either case, the other thing I would say is that not only are you talking about internal resources, but external resources are a lever. Even for large serial acquirers like the ones I've been in, in both cases we've had external resources for different reasons, either to build to a certain level, and then for peaks and valleys, or to take off, you might have external burst capacity for a variety of different activities, or one really large deal that you might need extra arms and legs in a lot of different areas, both from an integration strategy and purely just to get things done. So even on a smaller deal or a smaller company, and I haven't played that role as well, coming in to help smaller companies. You might just need somebody to come in and guide, just from experience, what needs to be done, help people along the way, step by step. Here's how to run the play, just from an advice perspective, and maybe help with some, hands-on blocking and tackling. But they're very different as far as how those things are tackled.
Yeah, really good outline. And here's a related question that's come in from Malik and Denise. I'm going to ask you to tee this one up. It's related, but now this one is about deal volume. And how do you manage varying deal volume? The question reads, how do you staff an IMO team to accommodate fluctuations in deal count and timing? For example, a company that may be only doing 1 or 2 deals per year versus ongoing serial acquisitions. Denise, you've seen this. What do you say to that?
Well, I'd say it's generally really important to have at a minimum, an IMO established that has some continuity, and at least a few program managers who have done acquisitions before, like in a company that is medium size and acquisitive to large and acquisitive. I would say that you want to make sure you have an IMO staff. When you start to get larger volumes of deals, or perhaps the corporation you're working for may be contracting, when you're getting larger volumes of deals, it's really important that you ramp up your staff to the activity that you're going to be dealing with. And you can do this one of 2 ways. If you're involved in the deals early in the life cycle, it's important to work with a corporate development team to make sure you have budget to staff those individuals. To the extent that you don't want to internally staff, it's also a really good option to consider outside resources. And then in periods where you have perhaps less deals to deal with, but you want to maintain the continuity of your IMO staff, what we have done in the past is get involved in other corporate projects that are cross-functional in nature and involve change management, because that's where a professional staff like the IMO can add a lot of value to the organization.
Yeah, really helpful background. And we've got another one that I really want us to get into the conversation. And Dan, this one's directed right at you with what you were explaining. And Kara writes, what are the biggest challenges you've experienced when trying to get a new role like the IMO off the ground for the first time in a corporation?
Yeah, it's a challenging question. I guess when you think about M&A integration as a whole, right, a lot of it comes back to change management. And when you're starting up a new function like integration program management manager role, or even the whole office, it's a similar thing. It's change management. It's taking people that in the past might have worked on an acquisition for a particular functional area, but didn't have a firm governance structure, didn't have a lot of people asking them questions about their status and what their problems are. And now all of a sudden they've got somebody that's constantly asking them, okay, what are you doing? When's it going to be done? Where are you at? What problems do you have? And so that can be challenging. It really comes down to building the relationship with those people. It comes down to helping them understand that, look, you're the expert, not trying to get in the way of your expertise. Help me understand what you're doing. Help me understand where it adds value and how it can have such a huge impact on the success of this integration. That's really where the key to success is, building those relationships, helping them understand that you're not there to micromanage them. You're there to learn and make sure that if they win the lottery the next day, that we've still got someone that knows enough about what they do to continue being successful.
Well put, Dan. And I would just underscore that it's very difficult from a true ROI standpoint to create an algorithm that says, here's the direct percentage increase in revenue cost synergy or cost synergy attainment through IMO, but there is deep and extensive anecdotal and experiential evidence that says it's the only way to consistently accomplish the deal thesis outcomes that you're doing the deal for in the first place. And that drives right back to that strategy execution theme. Linda, I'm going to pick one off the queue for you. This is a great one. And I think several of you have mentioned the role of corporate development. How do you document the case, work more effectively with? The question from Harris for Linda says, how should corporate development and the IMO work together to best accomplish the transaction and integration objectives? For example, what are the dependencies and overlaps between Corp Dev and IMO along the life cycle? Wow, common question and big challenge.
So when I first started in M&A, my first 2 deals just kind of landed on my desk and like, here, go integrate this. And I'm like, wow, okay. And this has been in regulatory approval for 6 months and I didn't even know about it. So I quickly learned the hard way that it was important to be engaged with Corp Dev, right? So there's a lot of advantages to being engaged early on. Not every Corp Dev is going to be real excited to have integration in there. So you may need to be a fly on the wall at first, but eventually you can capture integration impacts. You can get the teams and their report outs and report findings to capture some of the integration impacts, because they're running across them. They have that knowledge, right? So if you can just get them to jot it down for you, or you listen in on the calls and you capture it. But even more importantly, if you think about all the decisions that are being made, the targets that are being set, the integration budget that we've hit on quite a bit, now you're going to have the background and you're going to be able to provide, hopefully, a little input into that integration budget. And then once you get into integration planning and execution, right, your plans have to support those value drivers that were identified. They have to support those synergy targets that were identified, and you have to operate within that budget. So at the end of the day, you come back to lessons learned, and what do you know? A lot of what you learn goes back and impacts Corp Dev and how that due diligence and the strategy was originally structured. So there's learnings all the way through the end. So at the end of the day, I think you'll have mutual respect for each other's roles and have a good working relationship.
Fantastic. This is a deep topic and a hard one. Denise or John, anything to add to that?
I can. Denise, you have anything?
No, go ahead, John.
Okay. Yeah, I guess it's a long time. Luckily, I'm part of Corp Dev is having IMO hosted within Corp Dev, and from the beginning we built that relationship. So I got to go way back now in time, but I did experience similar things to Linda when we were first starting it up at Dell, and yeah, I mean, part of it is building that relationship, building the trust, so that you are invited to the table during diligence, sitting in on the diligence readouts, whether they be kind of old world, everybody gets in a room, goes on site for a couple days, or in our world, or now the COVID world, where you're just sitting on webcasts or Zoom calls or whatever. But understanding from the beginning what's the business case, having the input into the integration budget is key. Understanding the diligence findings as they come, and then one of the other things as part of baking into your integration planning, aside from value drivers, is also we call value risks, or what kind of remediation efforts are you going to have, because certain things are not up to snuff in some of these, especially if you're a large company buying a small company, right? So yeah, it's a lot about getting in there and getting a seat at the table early on, and sometimes that's hard to do if you've got some people that haven't set in their mind that everything's got to be controlled and under NDA, right?
Great. I'm going to go over to a question that Dale writes, an excellent question, and Dale says, while we are a serial acquirer averaging 10 to 12 small $20 to $100 million deals a year, and occasionally some larger than that, we do not have a dedicated IMO. Instead, we use a matrix IMO with resources spread across several corporate departments. What's your experience in a dedicated resource IMO environment versus a matrix IMO? Now, we can all relate with that. It's a common model and a common challenge. Who wants to take that one first, panel?
I just had a clarifying question when I saw that one earlier, Mark. So I guess what's the definition of matrix IMO that we're referring to?
For today's discussion, let's assume that it is resources drawn from each of several different functional organizations, but not a standing role, not a standing team to do the deal the same way, the same process over and over. And so, Dale, I know that's probably not exactly the context, but let's just try to put ourselves in that situation, panel. What would you say?
So
Yeah,
Mark,
and I would say, oops, sorry, Denise, go ahead.
Okay. So Mark, I would say in my experience, having worked with a dedicated IMO, but also kind of in a matrix place where the functional resources came from the business, realistically, the IMO is the glue that holds all of the functions together. And an important role for the IMO is cross-functional. The people in finance, the people in HR, the people in the business units have a tendency to look at the world through only their lens, but there are plenty of cross-functional work streams that have to be integrated, such as quote to cash or procure to pay. And you really do need somebody who can speak across the organization and make sure that there's no hotspots or gaps in your integration plan to make sure those happen and happen properly. Linda, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to say it doesn't have to be all or nothing, so it doesn't have to be 100% dedicated or a matrix, right? I think there's key roles that you would want to focus on to be dedicated, like that IMO lead, like that IMO program manager, so you have those learnings from one deal to the next. The other resources, HR, IT, for instance, HR is very front-loaded, IT is very back-end loaded, so while they may not be dedicated, they may not need to be dedicated throughout the whole integration, right? Just during those peak times. So if you can do some resource planning across the integration, that 6 to 12 months, whatever it is for you, that would help quite a bit as far as being able to justify when you need those resources.
Fantastic. We've probably got time for one, maybe two quick questions. And here's a great one from Kim. Any recommendation for how to handle having a different team in every deal? So it's related to, but it's different than the one we just tackled. For example, Kim says, we have the same integration leader, but each deal we have a new integration program manager, new unit HR workstream lead, new finance workstream lead. John, you're smiling, shaking your head. Dan, you've seen this. We've all seen this. What's the answer? Who wants to take this one?
Yes, try to sell. This is another part of selling the value, but each one of those functions identifies somebody. It does, like Linda was saying, maybe it's not dedicated, depends on your deal volume, but at least if it's the same people all the time who are trained and have some experience and build deal reps, that just makes it a heck of a lot, more streamlined and easier, if you will, reduces the risk, whether they're fully dedicated or not. And then back to the other question, I guess I have actually heard of, I've not been part of it, but dedicated doesn't necessarily mean within the IMO. It can be their hardline reporting relationships are in the functions. It's just they're dedicated to M&A and they're dotted line in from a kind of project perspective. And so they may come and go depending on your deal flow. Okay.
Yeah, sounds good. Any other final comments on the new workstream lead question? Anybody?
I think the critical piece is just making sure that there's good documentation. I mean, you can rotate people in and out more frequently if you need to. It just increases, you're taking less tribal knowledge and you're going to lean more on good documented process so that the next person coming up knows their framework and what they need to be focused on.
Really well put. Linda, final word?
Yeah, just to reiterate what Dan said, I mean, capture those templates, capture those cheat sheets, capture those project plans. Don't let them operate in a silo if you can. If you have that information, you've got the key. So
I would add dedicated training to those roles, onboarding detailed criteria, responsibilities. You don't want the green beans, as my friend Paul from BMO says. You want the best of the best in every function that know the drill and can get it done. And so that means you've got to drive back to that resourcing and budgeting model with Corp Dev and the CFO and the deal team, like many of you have identified. Well, listen, we're out of time, but I want to thank everybody. This has been a fun discussion, a very important discussion, and a great conversation. So on behalf of all of us at the M&A Leadership Council, please join us. We've been doing this for 10 years. We are passionate about it. We've trained over 4,000 executives from over 700 best-in-class organizations like many of yours, and we look forward to seeing you at one or more of these outstanding training events coming up, all online through the end of 2020. Remember that discount code that you'll see in the deck, and in reply to the email that you'll get from us after the webinar, if you want more information about program management versus integration, just reply to that email, SPICE, and we'll send you the link to the article with a lot more content, program outline about all of those. And with that, I want to say thank you to our panelists once again for a great expert level, true M&A professional conversation. You're a tribute to your profession and your organizations. And thanks to each of our participants for joining today's webinar. Be safe, everybody. Take care. We'll see you again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.